My name's Bennett Boyd, and I'm a missions coordinator for the Road, and I've been at Faithbridge since I was a student, so 20 years now. Just growing up in the church is what I knew. My parents were super plugged in. My mom worked here for a short stint, and I remember at Kleb, my dad was on the teardown team, so we'd get there early so he could put all the chairs out, and then we'd stay after and pick them all back up again. And so been in Kingdom Club, and which was kids ministry back in the day, and started going to Curious in middle school, and eventually got into a discipleship relationship. So there, all of these things that I had been learning and growing in as a child, all of a sudden become real when you enter high school, and there's the real world, real life, real problems, real sin, and that's the moment where the rubber meets the road, and you realize, okay, like I've heard about Jesus my whole life, and I know him, but that was the moment when I realized I need him. So I got to be a part of the Road, which is Faithbridge's missions program that really exists to develop kingdom difference makers. And so it's this idea of we don't just want to send students on missions to do, but we want to send them on missions to grow. Like, I've been transformed by the Road. And I didn't realize it at the time. It's kind of this thing where students don't realize that we're secretly trying to develop them the whole time. But looking back, I'm like, man, they were developing me, and I grew, and now I love the Lord more than I ever would have without it. And I felt like the Road did a really good job of, when I was a student, like helping me see that my life could be missional. But I still felt this sense of like, but I need to go. And so I, as a 15-year-old, got to go to France for the first time, and there's, the Eiffel Tower, the lights, the crepes. It was this magical experience. But what I didn't expect was to just experience a deep darkness that I had never encountered before. We'd go into these beautiful cathedrals, works of art, pieces of history, and they're just empty and dark. And it made me sad. And so I have this memory of walking behind my family, they don't really know this, of walking behind my family in Paris, and I'm just like weeping, and I'm like, why am I crying? We're in Paris. But I was sad, and I look back at that moment, and I'm like, I think that's the first time that God burdened my heart for France. This past summer, Tanner Coleman, who used to work for the Road and is now a missionary in Greece, reached out to me, and he said, hey, I'd love you to come on a vision trip to Greece and see if maybe God would call you here. There's a bunch of French-speaking refugees, and we need someone who can speak French. And I said, okay, like I'll definitely come, and felt like God was opening the doors for something. And there's a specific moment that really kind of sealed the deal for me. I was at the airport, and it was packed. And so there's not, an empty seat in the house. And so this older French woman comes to my table that I'm sitting at and says, hey, can I sit with you? Which normally a French person would never do. But, God ordained this encounter, and so I'm sitting there talking to her in French. She's asking what I'm doing, and I said, well, I want to be a missionary, and I'm trying to decide where. Like, I don't know if it's Greece or France or maybe somewhere else. And she was like, oh my gosh, you need to come to France. France needs so much help. And I asked her, I'm like, oh, are you a Christian? And she said, yeah, I'm a Christian. And I was like, oh my gosh, that's amazing. And so we're talking, and then it later comes out, she goes, but I don't believe in God anymore. And I was like, oh, and just like felt this, like, exactly like what I felt when I was 15 years old in Paris, this breaking of my heart again, that France needs Jesus, and I wanted to be a part of it. That was the moment when God affirmed, it's France. It always has been. I've made you wait a long time, but it's France. And all of a sudden, like, I had a vision for what that would look like. So I applied to work with Greater Europe Mission, also called GEM, and went to an orientation and was eventually commissioned to serve in France. And so my goal would be to arrive in France and hit the French soil in July. In many ways, I don't feel equipped, but I know that He's faithful to equip us to the things He calls us to. And so I would just love to see French people come to know the Lord. Especially just the younger generation, and to look at what the past 20 years of my life have been, full of growing and trusting and surrendering. And I just look back at first grade Bennett. And I would just tell her, Bennett, you have no idea what God's going to do, but it's going to be so good.